Sabalenka's mother has stayed silent until now, and what she revealed about her daughter's obsession with beating Alex Eala will leave you speechless. Because while the entire tennis world watched Aryna Sabalenka dominate courts from Melbourne to New York, a quieter, more private battle raged behind closed locker room doors, one that only a mother could see. They told you this was just sport. They told you this was just competition. But Yulia Sabalenka sat at courtside every single tournament, watching her daughter burn with something that went far beyond trophies, something personal, something consuming, something that cost more than $200,000 and still wasn't enough. So when a woman who almost never speaks finally chose to speak, the entire tennis universe stopped breathing. What exactly did she say, and why does it change everything you thought you knew about Aryna Sabalenka? Stay with us. Every second of this video matters. To understand the obsession, you first need to understand the throne. By the time 2026 arrived, Aryna Sabalenka had already cemented herself as one of the most dominant forces women's tennis had witnessed in over a decade. 4 Grand Slam titles, back-to-back Australian Open crowns in 2023 and 2024, a US Open victory in 2025, 55 consecutive weeks perched at the summit of the WTA rankings. She didn't just play tennis, she weaponized it. Every serve a declaration, every forehand a statement, every match a performance of controlled fury that left opponents questioning whether they belonged on the same court. Her mother, Yulia Sabalenka, had witnessed every single moment of this ascent. She stood in the stands in Melbourne when Aryna held her first Grand Slam trophy aloft. She cried behind sunglasses in New York when the US Open title was claimed. She had watched her daughter grow from a reckless, thundering teenager in Minsk into the most feared competitor on the planet. And through it all, Yulia remained what she had always been, a presence, not a voice, visible but silent, supportive but private. Aryna had spoken about her mother frequently in interviews, always with a reverence bordering on tenderness. She described Yulia as calling her after every match asking if she was quitting tennis, not out of doubt, but out of a mother's constant worry that her child was pushing too hard, sacrificing too much. After Aryna's father, Sergei, passed away suddenly in 2019, at just 43 years old, Yulia became more than a mother. She became the foundation upon which the entire Sabalenka story stood. Everything Aryna fought for carried Yulia's fingerprints. And then came Alex Eala. Alexandra Eala arrived on the WTA Tour like a weather event nobody had fully prepared for. The Filipina, just 20 years old, possessing a game that mixed aggressive baseline power with remarkable composure, began dismantling opponents with surgical efficiency. At the 2025 US Open, she made it past Clara Tauson, becoming the first Filipino woman in history to win a Grand Slam match at that stage. The stands in Melbourne, Abu Dhabi, and Miami erupted whenever she walked onto court. Former professional Sam Querrey went on the Nothing Major podcast and declared that Eala had surpassed Sabalenka and Coco Gauff as the biggest draw in women's tennis. His co-host Steve Johnson agreed without hesitation. That statement didn't stay contained into a podcast studio. It ricocheted across every tennis forum, every social media thread, every press room in the world. And somewhere in a private conversation between a mother and daughter, it became something much more dangerous. A spark dropped into a room soaked in gasoline. This is where the obsession began. Not on a court, in a conversation. And the woman who heard everything, who lived inside that conversation, was Yulia Sabalenka herself. Here is the fact that the mainstream tennis media glossed over, buried beneath tournament draws and ranking point calculations. Alex Eala named Aryna Sabalenka as her dream opponent. Not Iga Swiatek, not Coco Gauff, not Elena Rybakina. Sabalenka, the reigning world #1, the most dominant player alive. In an appearance on Served with Andy Roddick, Eala was asked directly,
Who, on today's tour, do you most want to face? She didn't hesitate. She named Sabalenka and revealed that she had almost encountered her at the 2025 US Open semifinals, telling her coach before facing Jessica Pegula that she desperately wanted the chance to play the world number one. That interview clip traveled further and faster than anyone anticipated. Within hours, it flooded Eala's fanbase, hundreds of thousands of Filipino supporters who celebrated every word. It flooded tennis forums where analysts debated whether the 20-year-old actually possessed the weapons to challenge Sabalenka. And it flooded the Sabalenka camp itself, where it was impossible to ignore. Now consider this alongside something else happening simultaneously. Tournament organizers at the 2026 Miami Open had made a decision that left Sabalenka publicly stunned, scheduling Eala on the biggest courts, managing her crowds with the same priority given to men's finalists. When asked about it, tournament director James Blake acknowledged the scramble, referencing how Eala's fanbase had already forced schedule revisions. Sabalenka, speaking to the press, said she was really shocked at what the organizers were considering. Not angry, not dismissive, shocked. A woman accustomed to commanding every room she entered, suddenly discovering that a younger player was commanding rooms she hadn't even entered yet. That shock didn't dissipate. It calcified. According to sources close to the Sabalenka camp, sources who have since spoken to tennis insiders without attribution, Sabalenka began tracking Eala's results with an intensity she typically reserves only for players who have directly beaten her. Serve stats, serve speeds, baseline positioning, shot selection under pressure, the kind of preparation you dedicate to a rival, not merely an upcoming opponent. And here is what nobody reported at the time. Behind the professional analysis, something far more personal was operating. Sabalenka had spent 2 years building the narrative that she was not merely the best active player, she was the defining face of women's tennis, the biggest draw, the most magnetic competitor. And now a 20-year-old from Manila was being described in identical language. Yulia Sabalenka sat at courtside through all of it, watching, absorbing, understanding something about her daughter that the cameras would never fully capture. Because mothers always see what the cameras miss.
Now pause. Ask yourself the question that everyone debating the story has avoided. Was Aryna Sabalenka wrong? Not in a moral sense, in a competitive one. Because everything the obsession produced was legitimate. The preparation, the investment, the relentless tracking of an emerging rival. These are not the behaviors of someone losing control. They are the behaviors of a champion who recognizes at a cellular level that the competitive landscape is shifting. The data supported the instinct. Eala had already beaten Coco Gauff, forcing her retirement through injury at Indian Wells 2026, a match that sent shockwaves through the tour. She had dismantled Jasmine Paolini in Dubai. She was drawing crowds that tournament directors scrambled to accommodate on the largest available courts. The Nothing Major podcast assessment that Eala surpassed Sabalenka and Gauff as the premier attendance draw was not opinion disguised as fact. It reflected documented attendance figures and organizational decisions that confirmed the commercial reality. Sabalenka's antenna had detected something real. The threat was genuine, and champions who ignore genuine threats do not remain champions. But here is the layer beneath that layer, the one Yulia's words illuminated. Aryna Sabalenka's athletic dominance had always been inseparable from her identity. She had told interviewers openly that after her father's death, putting the Sabalenka name into tennis history became her consuming mission. She had described sacrificing motherhood plans, describing her mother's gentle pressure to stop and rest as something she couldn't yet honor. She had built a life in which tennis was not merely a career, but a monument to grief, love, and resilience. What Eala represented, beneath all the competitive mathematics, was a different kind of challenge. Not just a player who might beat her in a tiebreak, a player who threatened to inherit the emotional ownership of women's tennis, the cultural authority, the crowd worship, the narrative centrality that Sabalenka had bled to claim. And Yulia saw that, clearly, completely. She didn't condemn it, She didn't minimize it. She articulated it with the disarming precision of someone who has watched this particular daughter longer and more closely than anyone alive. The $200,000, the private analysts, the footage sessions, the courtside obsession, none of it was irrational. All of it was human. And that is precisely what makes it so compelling. Here is where history positions itself to remember this moment. Two players, two completely different origin stories. One from Minsk, Belarus, raised on grief, shaped by loss, driven by a father's memory and a mother's love into becoming the most powerful competitor in women's tennis. Another from Manila, Philippines, representing millions of people who had never seen themselves reflected in Grand Slam draws, carrying a nation's passion onto every court she entered. They have not yet played each other. Let that land for a moment. As of the Stuttgart entry list released in April 2026, both Sabalenka and Eala appear on the same tournament roster. The draw has not yet been announced, a collision that Eala herself named as her greatest competitive desire, that tournament organizers, analysts, and millions of fans have circled on calendars, has not yet materialized on a scoreboard. But it will. The mathematics of tennis make it inevitable. And when it does, this backstory will flood every broadcast, every highlights package, every post-match interview. Because rivalries without context are just matches. Rivalries with mothers, memories, obsessions, and silences behind them, those become legends. Yulia Sabalenka broke her silence not to expose her daughter or generate controversy. She broke it because mothers, at a certain point, cannot remain silent when they see their children carrying something so heavy and so human alone. Her words were not a criticism of Aryna's intensity, they were a testament to it, a declaration that behind the trophies and the rankings and the thundering serves, there exists a daughter who loves so completely that competition becomes indistinguishable from devotion. And Eala? She walks into every arena with an entire nation behind her, unaware, or perhaps completely aware, that she has become the obsession of the most decorated active player in women's tennis. $200,000 spent, a mother's silence finally broken, and a match that hasn't happened yet already feels like the most anticipated collision in women's tennis in years. Was this rivalry always inevitable, or did Yulia's silence and the obsession it protected make it so? Drop your answer in the comments, because this conversation is nowhere near finished. If this story reached somewhere inside you, if you felt the weight of what Yulia carried, the fire of what Aryna chased, the promise of what Eala represents, then you already know what to do. Subscribe. Hit that notification bell, because the next chapter of this rivalry is coming, and you don't want to be the one who missed it.